My name is Victoria Simmons. I am 36 years old. I am the founder and CEO of Simmons Capital Group, LLC, a commercial real estate investment firm based in Houston, Texas. And on a warm Saturday evening in April 2024, I slid a set of keys across a white linen tablecloth toward my father. Keys to a brand new Ford F-25 Super Duty King Ranch Edition worth $94,500, and instead of saying thank you, he stood up, tapped his crystal wine glass with a dinner fork, and announced to everyone in that private dining room that his oldest daughter had once again mistaken a price tag for a personality. Then he sat back down and let my brother-in-law take the moment. I smiled. I picked up my water glass, and I decided quietly in the space between one heartbeat and the next that I was done. If you're listening from somewhere far away, drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this has traveled, and please stay with me until the end. Because this story isn't just about a truck, or a dinner, or even a family that spent 36 years making one daughter feel invisible while treating the other like royalty. This story is about what happens when the person everyone counted on to stay quiet finally decides to use every tool she has, legal, financial, and strategic, to make sure the truth comes out on her terms. So, let's go back to the beginning. It was almost 11 o'clock at night when Victoria finally leaned back in her chair and let herself exhale. The office was dark except for the glow of her monitors. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped around the corner of the 22nd floor, and below them, Houston spread out in every direction. Highways lit up like copper veins, downtown towers blinking slow and steady, the Galleria district shimmering in the distance. She'd looked at this view 1,000 times. Tonight it felt different. On the desk in front of her, a signed contract. 48,000 square meters of commercial warehouse space on the western outskirts of Houston. Total deal value, $14.2 million. The largest single acquisition in the 8-year history of Simmons Capital Group, LLC. Victoria picked up her water glass. Not champagne, not whiskey, just water. And held it up toward the window for a second. A quiet toast. No one else was there to see it, and that was fine. She'd gotten used to celebrating alone a long time ago. She was 36 years old, and she had built every single piece of this from scratch. Not from family money, not from a trust fund, not from a husband's connections or a father's Rolodex. From $40,000 she'd saved working as a junior real estate broker while eating ramen 4 nights a week and sleeping on a mattress she'd bought off Craigslist for $60. From 8 years of 18-hour days, of deals that fell through at the last minute, of banks that said no, of investors who patted her on the shoulder and told her the commercial market was a tough space for someone like her. She'd learned what that phrase meant the 3rd time she heard it. She'd stopped caring the 5th time. By the 10th time, she'd stopped hearing it at all, because by then, she was already closing deals those same people were too slow to catch. Simmons Capital Group now held a portfolio of 32 commercial properties across Texas. She had 11 employees. She had a penthouse apartment on the 28th floor of a tower 3 blocks from this office. She had a reputation in the Houston business community that had taken years of grinding to build and that she protected with a quiet, uncompromising fierceness. And she had a family that, for 36 years, had looked at all of it and seen nothing but a convenient ATM. She grew up in Bel Air, a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood in southwest Houston, the kind of place where the houses all had wide front porches and someone was always mowing their lawn on a Saturday morning. Her parents, Raymond and Gloria Simmons, had bought their 4-bedroom brick home in 1989, and they were proud of it the way only people who'd worked hard for something can be proud. Raymond had been a civil engineer for the city of Houston for 30 years. Gloria had worked part-time at the church office and managed the household with the efficiency of someone running a small corporation. On the surface, they were a solid, respectable family. Church every Sunday, block parties in the summer. Raymond coaching Little League for 3 seasons before his back gave out. But underneath that surface, there was a current that Victoria had felt her whole life without ever quite having the words for it, until she got older and the words became impossible to ignore. There were 2 daughters in the Simmons household, and they were not treated the same. Victoria was the oldest by 5 years. She was serious, driven, and quiet in the way that smart kids sometimes get quiet when they figure out early that the world rewards performance. She made the honor roll every semester from 5th grade onward. She won a regional science fair at 14. She read business biographies for fun and drove her teachers crazy with questions they weren't prepared to answer. Destiny was 5 years younger, and she was the sun the whole family orbited around. It wasn't that Destiny was cruel exactly. Not when they were kids anyway. She was just the kind of girl who was pretty in an effortless way and funny and easy and warm, and their parents, Raymond especially, responded to her like a flower turning toward light. When Destiny walked into a room, Raymond's whole face changed. He laughed louder. He leaned in. He looked the way people look when something genuinely delights them. When Victoria walked into a room, Raymond looked up from whatever he was doing, gave her a small nod, and went back to it. She'd told herself for years that she was imagining it, that she was being oversensitive, that this was just how fathers were with their younger kids, with their daughters who were softer and smaller and needed more protecting. She told herself so many versions of this story that, by the time she was 17, she believed all of them simultaneously and none of them at all. And then came the college money. Victoria that was 18 when she got the acceptance letter from Texas A&M College of Business. Partial scholarship. About 60% of tuition covered. Her parents had been setting aside money for years, a small education fund that Raymond mentioned every Thanksgiving like a point of pride. We're taking care of our girls. The remaining 40%, roughly $11,000 a year, was supposed to come from that fund. 3 weeks after the acceptance letter arrived, Gloria sat Victoria down at the kitchen table and told her, in a voice so gentle it almost sounded kind, that the money wasn't going to be available after all. Destiny had been selected for a prestigious private ballet program downtown, and the enrollment fee plus the first year of instruction was $9,800. Raymond felt it was important not to miss this window for Destiny's development. Victoria sat across from her mother and looked at her for a long time without saying anything. "What about my window?" she finally asked. Gloria reached across the table and patted her hand. "You're the strong one, baby. You'll figure it out. You always do." She did figure it out. Student loans. 3 part-time jobs, a campus coffee shop in the mornings, a grocery store on weekends, and data entry for a property management firm on Tuesday and Thursday evenings. She graduated in 4 years with a 3.8 GPA, $44,000 in debt, and a furious, quiet determination that she carried around like a stone in her chest. She paid off those loans herself, every dollar. It took her 6 years. Destiny quit ballet after 18 months. The pattern repeated itself so many times over the following decade that Victoria stopped being shocked by it and started being something worse. Resigned. At 22, she lent her parents $6,000 when they fell behind on the mortgage during a rough patch. Raymond had framed it as an emergency, and she'd given it without hesitation because that's what you do for family. The money was never repaid and never mentioned again. At 25, she co-signed a credit card for Destiny, just to help her build credit, Victoria, that's all. And spent the next 14 months watching her sister run up $18,000 in charges on designer bags and spa weekends before calling Victoria in tears because the minimum payment was due and she was, quote, totally broke right now, like, this is an actual crisis. Victoria paid it off, all of it, because the alternative was watching her sister's credit get destroyed, and somehow that felt like her problem to solve. At 28, she stopped, cold. No announcement, no dramatic confrontation. She just looked at her bank account one morning and then looked at the life she was trying to build and did the math and decided she was done being the family piggy bank. She redirected every dollar she'd been sending home into her own investment account, found a business attorney, filed her LLC paperwork, and got to work. Nobody in her family said congratulations when she opened Simmons Capital Group. Her father said it was risky. Her mother said she hoped Victoria wasn't getting too big for her britches. Destiny didn't say anything at all. 8 years later, Victoria was closing a $14 million deal at 11 o'clock at night, alone in a corner office, toasting herself with a glass of water. She was okay with that. She'd made her peace with it. And then her phone buzzed on the desk, a text from Gloria. "Victoria, honey, Dad's birthday is next month. He wants to do something big this year. You know how he gets. Can you help organize? You're so good at these things." Victoria read it twice, put the phone face down on the desk, picked it back up, typed, "I'll be there." She turned off her monitors, gathered her things, and took the elevator down into the Houston night. Saturday, April 13th, 2024. Monarch Steakhouse, Houston. Victoria had booked the private dining room at Monarch 6 weeks in advance. Monarch was the kind of restaurant that didn't need to advertise. The kind of place you found out about through other people, through a whisper at a dinner party or a recommendation from someone who just closed a serious deal and wanted to market properly. Dark mahogany paneling, chandelier lighting calibrated to make everyone look like the best version of themselves. Waitstaff who memorized your preferences without being asked. The private room held 20 people and had its own bar cart and a window that looked out over a curated stretch of the Galleria district. Victoria had spent $1,200 on the room deposit alone. She did not consider this excessive. Her father was turning 71. She wanted to do it right. She arrived 30 minutes early, the way she always arrived everywhere, not anxious, just prepared. She checked the table settings, confirmed the menu with the floor manager, and arranged the seating herself. Her father at the head of the table, obviously. Herself to his right, Gloria to his left. She positioned Destiny and her husband Carter Webb across the table, where she could see them both clearly, and then she walked outside to the valet area and looked at it one more time. The Ford F-250 Super Duty King Ranch Edition. Dark matter green, a deep, almost military shade that shifted between green and black depending on the light. 6.7-liter Power Stroke diesel engine. Heated and cooled leather seats, a spray-in bed liner, and a chrome step bar. The thing was enormous and beautiful and aggressively masculine in a way that her father would appreciate down to his bones. She had bought it specifically because of something Raymond had said 3 months earlier, sitting in his living room watching a truck commercial during halftime. He'd pointed at the screen and said, "Now that is a real truck. That's a man's vehicle. None of these little electric go-karts the young people think are so impressive." She'd filed that away. She always filed things away. The truck was parked directly under a streetlight outside the restaurant window. 71 years old, and her father still deserved to have someone pay attention to what he wanted. Guests arrived over the next 20 minutes. The 3 friends from Raymond's golf club, older men in blazers who shook hands too firmly and laughed too loudly and were exactly who they'd always been. Aunt Patricia in her church-going best, hat and all. A few cousins. Gloria arrived in a lavender dress, fussing with her earrings. Raymond came in last, which was his way of making an entrance, wearing a black suit jacket that Victoria had given him for Christmas. And then Carter Webb walked in with Destiny on his arm. Carter was 38, tall and broad-shouldered, with blonde hair he kept combed back and a jaw that looked engineered for confidence. He wore a charcoal suit that fit like it had been made for him. It probably had been. And he had the handshake of a man who'd practiced it in a mirror. His watch caught the chandelier light as he moved through the room, pressing flesh and saying "Good to see you, sir" to people he'd met exactly once. Destiny looked beautiful in a way that required effort she would never admit to. A champagne-colored dress, hair done, makeup perfect. She squeezed into the seat across from Victoria and immediately pulled out her phone to check how the lighting was hitting the table. "You look nice," she said to Victoria in the tone people use when they mean you look fine, I guess. "Thanks, Des," Victoria said. Carter sat down across from her and met her eyes for exactly 1 second before looking away at something more interesting. He had a gift for making you feel like the least compelling person in any room he was in. Victoria had watched him do it to other people for 3 years and had never once let it work on her. The dinner was smooth for the first hour. Good wine. Raymond's preference was a French Bordeaux, so she'd arranged for 2 bottles. The Wagyu beef was perfectly cooked. Raymond held court at the head of the table, telling the same 3 golf stories he always told, and his friends laughed the same 3 laughs they always laughed, and Gloria beamed at him the way she always beamed, and it was, Victoria thought, exactly the kind of evening where nothing had to go wrong. She was waiting for the right moment, after the main course was cleared. That was what she'd planned. The plates came away. Victoria reached into her small clutch and removed the heavy, matte black key fob. She set it on the tablecloth in front of her and slid it slowly across the white linen toward her father. Attached to it was a small cream-colored card in her handwriting. "Happy 71st, Dad. You always said a man deserves a real truck. Victoria." Raymond looked down at the key fob, turned it over in his fingers, looked out the window at the massive dark green truck gleaming under the streetlight. Someone at the table gasped. One of the golf buddies let out a low whistle. Aunt Patricia clapped once, sharp and delighted. Victoria watched her father's face. She watched the way his eyes moved from the truck back to her. She watched for the thing she had spent 36 years waiting to see, some uncomplicated, unguarded version of pride. My daughter did this. Just that. Nothing complicated. Raymond set the key fob down on the tablecloth. He picked up his wine glass. He tapped it with his dessert fork. One clean, ringing note that brought the whole table to silence. And he stood up. "Y'all, I want to say a few words," he said, loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear through the half-open dividing door. He smoothed the front of his jacket, the jacket Victoria had bought him, and looked around the room with the satisfied expression of a man who had been waiting for this exact moment all evening. "About my daughter, Victoria." He paused for effect. "This girl, she works hard, I'll give her that, always has. But she's got this idea that she can waltz in here with her real estate money and her big gestures, and somehow that's supposed to count as love." He chuckled, low and indulgent, like he was letting her in on a joke she wasn't quite smart enough to understand. "Money don't buy class, baby girl, and it sure don't buy what you actually owe this family." Scattered laughter around the table. Not everyone, but enough to fill the room with it. Gloria was already reaching over to squeeze Victoria's wrist, whispering, "Fix your face. Don't you dare make a scene," before the words had even fully landed. And then Carter Webb stood up. He stood up smoothly, unhurriedly, the way men stand up when they've been waiting for their cue. He buttoned his jacket with one hand and reached into his inside pocket with the other and produced a small square box. Navy blue velvet, gold stitching on the lid. "Well," Carter said, setting the box on the table and sliding it toward Raymond with a practiced, easy smile. "Victoria got you something to haul stuff around in. Destiny and I wanted to get you something a little more timeless." Raymond opened the box. Inside, on a cushion of white satin, sat a Rolex Submariner. Black dial, steel case, the bracelet catching the chandelier light in a way that made the whole table inhale. Raymond's hands trembled as he lifted it out. "Lord have mercy," he breathed. His voice cracked on the second word. He looked at Carter with wet eyes. "Son, this is something else. This is what real success looks like right here." He strapped it to his wrist. He turned it in the light. He held it up so the golf buddies could see. Victoria watched from across the table. She was good at spotting things. It was, in many ways, her actual job, and what she spotted in approximately 4 seconds was this. The second hand on that Rolex was moving in discrete ticks. 1 step per second, mechanical and choppy, instead of the smooth, continuous sweep that was the unmistakable signature of a genuine Rolex movement. The lume on the hour markers looked slightly off-color under the warm restaurant lighting. The crown logo at 12 o'clock was positioned with a micro degree of misalignment that no Swiss quality control department would ever let through. That was not a real Rolex. That was a high-quality replica, probably sourced from one of the better counterfeit operations that shipped out of Southeast Asia, the kind that retailed for $300 to $400 and fooled about 95% of people who looked at them. Carter Webb had given her father a fake watch in a real box and was currently accepting the credit for an act of generosity that had cost him less than a decent dinner, and her father was crying over it. Gloria leaned close to Victoria's ear. Her grip on Victoria's wrist tightened. "Don't you sit there looking like that. You jealous of your own sister, and it is ugly, Victoria. It is ugly." Victoria looked at her mother, looked at Destiny, who was photographing the watch on her father's wrist from 3 different angles for Instagram. Looked at Carter, who caught her eye over the rim of his wine glass and smiled. The smallest, most satisfied smile she had ever seen on a human face. The smile of a man who had just won something. Looked at her father, who had already forgotten the $94,500 truck parked 20 feet away outside the window. She set her linen napkin on the table. She stood up. "Happy birthday, Dad," she said. Her voice was quiet and even. No tremor, no edge, just the words. She picked up her clutch, nodded once to Aunt Patricia, and walked out of the private dining room without looking back. The night air outside was cool and still smelled of the restaurant's kitchen. Wood smoke and butter. The valet looked up and started toward her. She shook her head. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment in front of the truck. Its dark green paint was almost black in the shadow between streetlights. She took out her phone, opened the fleet management app, confirmed GPS location, activated the remote lock. Then she ordered a rideshare and watched the little car icon make its way toward her on the map. 42 minutes later, she was home. She made chamomile tea. She sat at her kitchen island in the dark. She didn't cry. She didn't call anyone. She just watched the GPS dot on her phone screen and thought about what she was going to do next. Victoria had been sitting at her kitchen island for almost 4 hours when the GPS dot stopped moving. She watched it settle, the little red marker holding steady on the map right in the center of her parents' driveway on Bel Air Oak Drive. The truck had been parked for 11 minutes. The house lights had gone dark 9 minutes ago. She set down her tea, picked up her phone, dialed. The dispatcher at Lone Star Heavy Hall picked up on the second ring. A woman with a flat, professional voice who sounded like she'd been awake for days and had made peace with that fact a long time ago. Victoria used this company regularly. They handled vehicle recovery and unauthorized parking situations across her commercial properties, 24/7, no questions beyond what the paperwork required. She paid a monthly retainer for exactly this kind of availability. "I need a flatbed recovery at a residential address in Bel Air," Victoria said. "Asset is a 2024 Ford F25 O Super Duty dark matter green diesel. It's got a heavy-duty tow package, so I need the right equipment. I don't want the frame stressed." "Full documentation on ownership?" "I'll have it waiting when your driver arrives. We can have someone there by 3:15, 3:30 at the latest." "That works." She ended the call, went to her home office, pulled out the corporate vehicle file, registration, title certificate, insurance policy, all 3 documents bearing the name Simmons Capital Group, LLC. She had structured the purchase this way as standard practice. Every significant asset her company acquired went on the corporate books. It made sense for tax purposes, for liability purposes, for exactly the kind of situation she had not, until about 5 hours ago, imagined she would actually find herself in. She put on a jacket, took her car keys, and drove to Bel Air. She parked 2 blocks from her parents' house, under the low canopy of a live oak that spread its branches across the whole width of the sidewalk. The neighborhood was absolutely still, the kind of still that only exists in residential Houston at 3 in the morning. No wind, no traffic, just the distant hum of the city existing somewhere else, and the occasional automatic sprinkler system clicking on in the dark. At 3:14 a.m., she heard it before she saw it. The low diesel rumble of a heavy flatbed making its way down the street, unhurried and methodical. The truck eased to a stop in front of her parents' driveway. The driver stepped out, and Victoria walked over to meet him in the shadow of a neighbor's magnolia tree. He was a heavy-set man in his 50s with a gray mustache and work boots that had seen about 1,000 jobs like this one. She handed him the documentation. He reviewed it under a small flashlight, checking the VIN on the paperwork against the number on the truck's door jamb, nodded, handed her documents back. "Clean title," he said. "No lien holder. This is straightforward." "I know," Victoria said. "Thank you." He got to work without another word. She stood back and watched. It took 11 minutes. The F250 rolled up onto the flatbed with a low mechanical groan, and the driver secured it with 4 heavy yellow nylon straps, 2 at the front axle and 2 at the rear. He checked the tension on each one with the unhurried thoroughness of someone who had done this so many times that it had become a form of meditation. Then he climbed back into the cab, gave her a small nod through the window, and drove away. The driveway was empty. Victoria stood on the sidewalk for a moment and looked at the house. The brick face of it, the front porch with the 2 rocking chairs Raymond had bought at a garage sale 20 years ago and never once used, the basketball hoop above the garage door from when she was 14. She had grown up inside those walls. She had spent so many years trying to earn her place inside those walls. She walked back to her car and drove home. She was in bed by 4:10 a.m. She slept without dreaming, deeply and completely, for 5 hours and 19 minutes. When she woke up at 9:30, she had 83 missed calls. She made coffee first. Dark roast, French press, the way she'd made it every morning for the past 6 years. She took her time with it, measuring the grounds, boiling the water to just below a full boil, waiting the full 4 minutes before pressing the plunger. This was not procrastination. This was the same thing she did before every important meeting, every high-stakes negotiation, every moment that required her to be completely present and completely clear. Then she sat down at the island and read through everything. Raymond had started calling at 6:09 a.m. 12 calls in the first 30 minutes, which told her he'd discovered the empty driveway early, probably woke up to use the bathroom and looked out the window from habit. His voicemails escalated from confused to furious across about 45 minutes. "Victoria, my truck is gone. Somebody stole my truck right out of the driveway. Call me back." 6:09 a.m. "I know you have some kind of app on that thing. Pull up the GPS right now and tell me where it is." 6:22 a.m. "You better not have had anything to do with this." 6:41 a.m. Gloria's messages were softer in tone but more aggressive in content, the particular combination that her mother had perfected over decades. Your father's blood pressure is through the roof, Victoria. He's been up since 6. This is not good for him. The implication being, of course, that whatever was happening was in some way Victoria's fault for not preventing it. And then there were Destiny's messages. Victoria, oh my God, Carter needs the truck this morning. He has a meeting with investors coming in from out of town and he needs to pick them up from the airport looking professional. This is literally a crisis right now. Where is the truck? Victoria read that one 3 times. She set her coffee mug down. Carter Webb, the man who had last night presented himself as a successful private fund manager with a client base substantial enough to warrant a luxury lifestyle and a fake Rolex, needed to borrow his father-in-law's birthday present to pick up investors from the airport. Not a car service, not a corporate vehicle, not a black SUV from one of the dozens of executive transportation companies that operated out of Houston's 2 major airports. His father-in-law's birthday present. She filed that thought away. It was a small thread, barely visible, but she had built an entire career on noticing small threads. She opened the family group chat, a space that had always functioned less like communication and more like a one-way announcement board, with Raymond at the top and everyone else orbiting at a respectful distance. And typed a single message. Dad, nobody stole the truck. The F250 is a registered asset of Simmons Capital Group, LLC. I had it recovered early this morning following last night's events. It was not a gift. It was a corporate asset with an authorized driver designation, which I have revoked. If anyone in this family needs transportation assistance, I'd suggest a rideshare app. She hit send. Watch the read receipts appear within seconds. 3 minutes of total silence in the chat. Then Raymond. You vindictive little witch. I already called the police. They're on their way to your place right now. Victoria put her phone face down on the counter and finished her coffee. She had already changed into a pressed blazer by the time the doorbell rang. 2 officers from the Houston Police Department stood in the hallway, both in uniform, both with the particular brand of tired professional energy that comes from responding to a call that started sounding like a civil dispute the moment the dispatcher explained it. The taller one had a notepad. The shorter one had his hands clasped in front of him like a man who had learned through experience to keep them somewhere visible. Standing directly behind them in the hallway of her building were Raymond Simmons and Carter Webb. Raymond had his arms crossed tight over his chest, chin up. Carter was standing slightly to Raymond's left and slightly forward, the physical posture of someone who had appointed himself the lead counsel for this particular expedition. He was wearing the same pants from last night with a fresh polo shirt, and the counterfeit Rolex was still on his wrist, still ticking in its little 1 step per second lie. He was also, Victoria noticed, bouncing slightly on the balls of his feet. The energy of a man who was very confident and very nervous at the same time, a combination she recognized from negotiating tables. Ms. Simmons? The taller officer said, looking down at his notepad. Victoria Simmons? That's me, she said. Ma'am, we received a report of a stolen vehicle, a 2024 Ford F250 registered to... Carter stepped forward, shouldering in front of the taller officer with the particular obliviousness of a man who had never once been told to wait his turn and actually listened. Officer, she already admitted in writing that she took the truck. It's in the group chat. I can show you right now. She needs to be charged and we need those keys back because I have a very important business. Sir. The shorter officer's voice was not loud, but it was the kind of voice that ended sentences. Step back, please. Carter stepped back. Barely. Raymond took his cue. She stole my birthday present, officer. My own daughter. You want to talk about ungrateful? She gave it to me in front of 20 witnesses and then sent a tow truck in the middle of the night like some kind of... Sir, I need you both to wait in the hallway, the taller officer said. He looked at Victoria. Ma'am, would you mind if we came inside for a moment? Please, Victoria said, and stepped back to let them through. She did not invite Raymond and Carter. When Raymond took a step toward the doorway, she looked at him directly and said simply, Not you. The taller officer confirmed it with a look and a slight shake of his head, and Raymond stopped, jaw tight, eyes burning. She closed the door. In the kitchen, she offered the officers coffee. They declined, politely, with the particular politeness of people who were already thinking about their next call. The shorter one complimented the view. The Houston skyline from the 28th floor on a clear Sunday morning was genuinely something. Victoria opened her briefcase, She'd pulled it out and staged it on the kitchen island before they arrived, and removed the folder. She laid out 3 documents in a clean row on the granite counter. The Texas Certificate of Title bearing the name Simmons Capital Group, LLC in the owner field. The current vehicle registration, same name. The corporate operating agreement for Simmons Capital Group, which confirmed her as the sole managing member with authority over all company assets. The vehicle was purchased by my company in March of this year, she said, keeping her voice level and informational, the way she spoke in boardrooms. My father was listed as an authorized driver on the corporate insurance policy as a courtesy. Following events last night, I revoked that authorization. The vehicle was recovered by a contracted tow company at approximately 3:15 this morning. I have the service receipt if you need it. She produced the receipt. Of course she had the receipt. The taller officer went through the documents carefully. He photographed the title with his phone. He read the registration twice. He looked at the VIN on the title, then called in the plate number on his radio, waited for the confirmation, and wrote something in his notepad. Then he exhaled through his nose. The long, slow exhale of a man doing a mental calculation about how to phrase what he was about to say. Ms. Simmons, he said, this vehicle is registered to your company. Your father's name does not appear on the title or the registration. That's correct. Then, as far as this department is concerned, there's no theft here. This is a civil matter. He closed his notepad. I apologize for the intrusion on your Sunday morning. Not at all, Victoria said. Thank you both. She walked them to the door and opened it. Raymond and Carter were still in the hallway. Raymond had his hands on his hips now. Carter had his phone out, thumb hovering like he'd been mid-text to someone. They both looked up with the expectant expressions of people who had already written the ending to this scene. Victoria in handcuffs, keys surrendered, appropriate humiliation achieved. What they saw instead were 2 officers walking out with nothing in their hands. The taller officer stopped in front of Raymond. Sir, the vehicle in question is legally owned by your daughter's company. Your name is not on the title. My strong advice to you is to let this go and go home. In a pause, filing a false police report is a Class B misdemeanor in the state of Texas. I'd keep that in mind. Raymond's face went through approximately 5 expressions in 4 seconds. He landed on a kind of stunned, deflated fury. The look of a man who had fully expected the world to take his side and had just discovered publicly that it had not. Carter didn't take it as quietly. This is insane, he said, stepping toward the officers. She is literally getting away with theft right in front of you. I have investors. I have a meeting. Do you understand what she just cost me this morning? She owes me money. She owes this family. Sir. The shorter officer's voice again. Same tone. Final. Carter stopped. Victoria looked at him from the doorway. Just looked at him. No expression, no emotion, just the quiet, steady attention of someone observing something they find informative. Have a good Sunday, Carter, she said, and she closed the door. By noon, Destiny had gone live on TikTok. Victoria found out because her phone started vibrating with tags and notifications from people she hadn't spoken to in years, cousins, old church friends, women from the neighborhood who had been in Gloria's Bible study group since Victoria was in elementary school. She opened one of the tags and there was Destiny, sitting on a white sofa in what looked like a hotel room, mascara professionally smudged, phone on a tripod, speaking directly to camera with the practiced devastation of someone who had workshopped this performance at least once before delivery. I just cannot believe my own sister would do something like this to our family, Destiny was saying to an audience of, at that moment, roughly 700 people. We were literally just trying to celebrate our daddy's birthday. She buys him this big flashy truck. Okay, fine, whatever. But then Carter got him a beautiful watch, and I think she couldn't handle it. She couldn't handle not being the center of attention for one single night. So she called a tow truck at 3 a.m, like some kind of... I don't even know what to call it. Victoria closed the app. She sat at her kitchen island and read through the text messages from the extended family. Aunt Patricia had sent 3 paragraphs about the prodigal son, which Victoria found theologically inexact given the circumstances. A cousin named Darnell, who still lived in Raymond's basement at the age of 39, called her a sellout who forgot where she came from the second she got a little money. An older woman from the church whose name Victoria could never quite remember sent a prayer emoji followed by, "This breaks my heart, baby. Honor thy father." Victoria put her phone in a kitchen drawer and went back to work. She spent the afternoon on the warehouse acquisition paperwork. finalizing title insurance, reviewing the environmental assessment, emailing her attorney with 3 questions that needed answers before the Monday morning call with the lender. She was good at this. She could compartmentalize the way surgeons compartmentalize, setting aside everything that wasn't immediately necessary and functioning with clean, focused attention on the thing directly in front of her. But Carter Webb kept coming back. Not in an emotional way, not in the way the rest of the morning's events kept trying to resurface. The look on her father's face when she gave him the key, the weight of her mother's hand on her wrist, the sound of the table laughing. Those things she could manage. She'd been managing them for years. What she couldn't manage was the math. Carter Webb claimed to run a private investment fund. He had claimed this with complete confidence and zero apparent irony for the 3 years since he'd married Destiny. He talked about his investors the way real fund managers talked about their investors, casually, possessively, with the easy fluency of someone who had inhabited that world for a long time. He name-dropped financial concepts and strategy frameworks the way people do when they want to make you feel slightly undereducated. He had a website. Victoria had looked it up once, about a year ago, purely out of professional curiosity, that was slick and minimal and said almost nothing of substance, which she had noted at the time and filed away as typical for a small private firm that didn't need to market publicly. But this morning, his first instinct when he needed a vehicle to impress clients had been to demand the truck she'd given her father. Not a black car service, not a rental. Not a call to whatever fleet account his firm should, by all rights, have had on retainer for exactly this kind of situation. Not even a Uber Black. $40 available in 8 minutes, completely appropriate for most professional pickups. Her father's birthday present. The desperation of that made no sense if Carter Webb was who he said he was. Victoria closed her laptop. She picked up her phone from the kitchen drawer, ignored the 17 new notifications, and found the number she was looking for in her contacts. Marcus Hale, former FBI, now private. She'd used him 4 times in the last 3 years to run background checks on potential commercial tenants and one business partner who had turned out to have 3 outstanding civil judgments she hadn't known about. He picked up on the second ring. Ms. Simmons. Marcus, I need a full financial workup on someone. Name is Carter Webb, 38 years old, based in Dallas. Claims to run a private investment fund called Webb Capital Advisors. I need everything. Business filings, licensing, banking, legal history, property records, all of it. A brief pause. Timeline? As fast as you can do it right. I'll be in touch. She hung up, stood in her kitchen for a moment, looked out the window at the Houston skyline in the late afternoon haze. Something was wrong. She didn't know exactly what yet. But in 8 years of commercial real estate, she had learned to trust the particular feeling she got in her chest when a deal was showing her its surface and hiding its structure. The feeling that the numbers other people were presenting didn't add up to the numbers that actually existed. She felt that feeling now. She went back to her desk and got to work. The warehouse deal wasn't going to close itself, and whatever Marcus Hale found, if he found anything at all, she would deal with it when it arrived. But the thread was there, and she was not the kind of woman who left threads alone. The email arrived at 6:47 p.m. Victoria was the only one left in the office. Her team had cleared out by 5:30. It was a Thursday, and she encouraged people to leave at a reasonable hour on Thursdays because Fridays always brought their own complications, and she preferred her staff rested. She had stayed behind to finish reviewing a lease amendment for one of her Midtown properties, a straightforward enough document that should have taken 40 minutes and had somehow stretched into 2 hours because her concentration kept sliding sideways. She'd been waiting for this email for 3 weeks. The sender name appeared in her inbox, and her hand stopped moving on the mouse. Marcus Hale, priority. The subject line was blank. There was a single sentence in the body of the email. No greeting, no sign-off, nothing before or after it, just the words themselves, sitting alone in the white space of the message like something Marcus had typed and deleted and retyped until he got it down to its minimum. Your brother-in-law is not a fund manager. He is running a Ponzi scheme. Full report attached, encrypted. Use the secondary password I sent to your other line. Victoria read the sentence twice, set the mouse down, picked up her personal cell phone and found the text from Marcus with the decryption password, 16 characters, sent at 6:45 p.m., 2 minutes before the email. He was methodical like that, sequenced. She opened the attachment. The decrypted document was 214 pages long. Marcus Hale did not write like an academic, and he did not write like a journalist. He wrote like a man who had spent 17 years at the FBI, reducing complex fraud schemes to the kind of language that held up in federal court, blunt, sequential, and annotated with source documentation at every claim. Victoria had worked with him 4 times before this. She had never seen him wrong about anything. She read the executive summary first. Webb Capital Advisors, incorporated in Delaware in 2020, registered to a virtual mailbox service with no physical office address. Carter Webb held no Series 65 license, no Series 7 license, no investment advisor registration with the SEC or FINRA. He had never been employed by any regulated financial institution. His educational background, which he had represented to investors as including an MBA from Wharton, consisted of 2 years at a community college in suburban Ohio, no degree conferred. The fund's stated strategy was diversified alternative investments with a focus on private equity and commercial real estate. Language generic enough to sound credible and specific enough to reassure people who didn't know what questions to ask. He had been promising investors quarterly returns of between 14% and 17%. Victoria had been in commercial real estate for 8 years. She knew what genuine returns looked like. 14 to 17% quarterly consistently was not an investment strategy. It was a number chosen specifically because it was high enough to be exciting and just low enough to seem theoretically possible to someone who didn't run the math. Classic Ponzi architecture. New investor money used to pay fake returns to existing investors, creating the illusion of performance, fueling word-of-mouth referrals, pulling in the next round. The scheme required constant new capital to survive. The moment the inflow of new money slowed, for any reason, the whole structure began to collapse under its own weight. Marcus estimated that Carter had been operating this way for approximately 3.5 years. Then Victoria got to the investor list. She had told herself, sitting in her car at 3 a.m. watching the tow truck work, that she was prepared for whatever this turned out to be. She had told herself the same thing again when she called Marcus, and again, in the quiet, rational part of her brain, when she composed the email request and hit send. She was not prepared for the investor list. Deacon Harold Phillips, 72 years old, 40 years as a city transit worker before retirement. He had invested $340,000. His entire city pension lump sum rolled over into Webb Capital Advisors in March of 2023 after Raymond Simmons had personally vouched for the fund at a church ministry meeting. Aunt Patricia, 65 years old. Victoria's mother's older sister, the woman who had sent Victoria Bible verses about honoring her father 2 weeks ago. She had invested $85,000, the proceeds from selling the house she and her late husband had shared for 27 years, money she had described to family members as her security for old age. 4 members of the church deacon board, pooled investment, total of $210,000, a retired schoolteacher named Beverly Okafor, who had attended the same church as the Simmons family since 1997, $62,000. A local bakery owner named James Whitfield, who had been Raymond's friend since their kids played Little League together, $95,000. 17 additional investors, amounts ranging from $18,000 to $120,000. Total documented investor capital, approximately $2.3 million. Total documented legitimate investments made with that capital, 0. The money had gone into a series of accounts that Marcus had traced through 3 layers of shell transfers before they disappeared into personal spending. Lease payments on the Dallas house, 2 luxury car leases, Destiny's credit card accounts, a vacation to Cabo in January, another to Turks and Caicos in March. Carter had been paying himself a management fee of roughly $28,000 a month. He had been paying fake quarterly returns to investors from new investor deposits, with just enough going out to keep people patient and just enough going in to keep the whole thing breathing. But the inflow had been decelerating for 6 months. The well of new investors was running dry. The scheme was in the terminal phase. Marcus had seen enough of them to know the signs. Carter was weeks, maybe a month or 2, away from full collapse. Victoria set her elbows on the desk and pressed her fingertips to her forehead. She sat like that for a long moment. Then she turned to the final section of the report. Marcus had pulled the property records for Harris County as part of his standard financial background sweep. The Simmons family home at 4417 Bel Air Oak Drive had been mortgage-free since August 2019, when Raymond and Gloria had made their final payment on a 30-year note. Raymond had talked about that payoff at Christmas dinner that year with a pride that Victoria still remembered. "Nobody owns a piece of my house now. That's mine. free and clear. 6 months ago, October 2023, a new lien had been recorded against the property. A home equity line of credit, $480,000, issued by a subprime lending institution based in Nevada, operating in Texas under a specialty finance license. Interest rate, 11.9%. The kind of lender that traditional banks referred to quietly and among themselves as a last resort shop, the place people went when their income was too limited and their collateral too thin to qualify anywhere reputable. The full $480,000 had been transferred to Webb Capital Advisors within 10 days of the loan closing. Victoria stared at that number for a very long time. She thought about the dinner table conversation from almost a year ago. Raymond asking her, casually over pot roast and green beans, how home equity loans worked and whether she thought private equity funds were a reliable vehicle for retirement income. She had answered him carefully and at length. She had told him explicitly, never leverage your primary residence for an unregistered investment vehicle. If a fund isn't SEC registered and doesn't provide audited financials, the money you put in might as well not exist. She had been clear. She had been specific. She had given him real information from years of professional experience. He had laughed and told her she'd always been too conservative for her own good. Carter knows things you don't know about making real money, Victoria. Not everybody wants to play it safe their whole life. She opened a browser window and pulled up the Harris County property records directly, running her own search. The lien was there, exactly as Marcus had described it. Public record. Anyone with a computer and a county assessor login could find it. She printed the document, added it to the growing stack from Marcus's report, tapped the edges of the pages against the desk to align them, set them in the center of her blotter. Then she leaned back in her chair and looked at the ceiling. Carter had built his scheme on the social capital of her family's name. Raymond's standing in the community, his reputation, the trust people placed in a man they'd known for 30 years. Every time Carter needed a new investor, he brought Raymond along as a character reference. And Raymond, who had convinced himself that he was going to get rich alongside everyone else, had obliged. He had introduced Carter to Deacon Phillips, to Aunt Patricia, to James Whitfield, to every person on that investor list who had come in through the church connection. Whether Raymond had known the fund was fraudulent from the beginning or had simply refused to look too closely at something he wanted to be true, Victoria wasn't certain yet. That distinction mattered legally. It didn't change much else. What it meant for tonight was this. Her family had spent 2 weeks calling her bitter, jealous, vindictive, and broken. They had broadcast that assessment to everyone they knew, and the entire time they had been sitting on a secret that made the truck look like a rounding error. She got up and went to the window. 22nd floor, the city laid out below her in its evening configuration. Office towers still lit, restaurants filling up, the freeways doing what Houston freeways always did. She thought about Deacon Phillips and his 40 years of transit work. She thought about Aunt Patricia's house money, the thing that was supposed to carry her through old age. She thought about Beverly Okafor and James Whitfield and the 17 other names on that list. None of them deserved what Carter Webb had done to them. And none of them were going to get justice from a man whose scheme was collapsing quietly while everyone watched Victoria's family drama play out on TikTok. She went back to her desk, opened her calendar, found the date that Destiny had mentioned 3 times, at Christmas and twice since, the big summer fundraising gala for Webb Capital Advisors scheduled for the 15th of June at River Oaks Country Club. A recruitment event, Victoria understood now, dressed up in charity language, Carter's last significant push for new investor capital before the whole structure gave way. She had been explicitly uninvited. Gloria had told her in January that her energy would not be appropriate for the evening. Victoria marked the date in red. She wasn't going to bring a gift. Wednesday, June 5th, 2024. 4:38 p.m. She heard it before her receptionist called back to warn her. The particular sound of someone moving through a professional space with the wrong kind of energy, too fast, too heavy. The sound of someone who had left their social calibration in the car. Her receptionist's voice on the intercom was carefully neutral. Ms. Simmons, there's a Mr. Webb here. He doesn't have an appointment. He says it's urgent. Victoria saved the document she was working on. Send him in. Carter came through the door the way a weather system comes through, filling the room with pressure before he'd fully arrived. He looked nothing like the man from the restaurant 3 weeks ago. The suit was the same quality, but it had been slept in, or close to it. His tie was loosened and listing to the left. His face was flushed in the particular way that suggested the flush had been there for hours, not minutes. and his eyes had the slightly unfocused quality of someone running on stress and caffeine and not much else. He closed the door behind him harder than necessary. "You want to tell me what the hell you think you're doing?" he said. His voice was still controlled, barely, the performance of a man who had arrived intending to be intimidating and was working to maintain that framing despite the fact that everything about him suggested he was the one who was scared. Victoria did not stand up. She folded her hands on the desk and looked at him with the same expression she used when a tenant tried to renegotiate a lease from a position of no leverage. "Carter, sit down." "I don't need to sit down. I need you to understand what you cost me with that stunt in April. You have any idea what I had to—" "Sit down," she said again. Same tone, no emphasis, just the repetition. He sat, the way people sit when they didn't mean to, suddenly and slightly surprised at themselves. He recovered quickly. The bravado snapped back into place like a rubber band. "I have lawyers, Victoria. I have very good lawyers in Dallas who have been looking at what you did with that truck, and we're talking about a civil suit, conversion of property, intentional infliction of—" "Carter." She opened the top right drawer of her desk and removed the manila envelope. She set it on the glass surface between them and slid it forward until it was within his reach. She did not say anything. She just tapped the envelope once with her index finger and waited. He looked at the envelope, looked at her, looked at the envelope again. "What is this?" he said. "Some kind of... Is this your legal team trying to... Open it?" He picked it up with the pointed, dismissive motion of a man trying to convey that he was humoring an idiot. He tore the flap open, pulled out the stack of pages, and looked at the first one. The executive summary, his name, his company, the word fraudulent in the third line. She watched his face. The change was not gradual. It happened all at once. A sudden, total evacuation of color, as if someone had reached in and turned a dial. His jaw went slack. His grip on the pages shifted from dismissive to white-knuckled without any visible transition between the two states. He flipped to the second page. The third. His hands started to shake, not dramatically, not theatrically, but with the fine involuntary tremor of someone whose nervous system had just received information it was not structurally prepared to process. "Where did you get this?" he said. It wasn't really a question. It was the sound of a man recalibrating. "I run background checks on every significant financial relationship connected to my company," Victoria said, "including people who marry into my family." He set the pages down on the desk, looked up at her. Something shifted in his expression. The desperation was still there, but it had reorganized itself. The entitled aggression had dropped away, and in its place was something colder and more calculated. The real Carter, she thought, the one underneath the polo shirts and the fake watch. "Okay," he said quietly. "Okay, you found it. What do you want?" "I don't want anything from you, Carter." "Everybody wants something." "Not me." She held his gaze. "I want you to understand that I know. That's all this conversation is." He stared at her for a moment. Then, with the instinct of a cornered animal trying one last angle, he leaned forward. "You think your daddy is just an innocent victim in all this?" he said. His voice had dropped to something almost conversational, the register of a man sharing a confidence. "You think Raymond just handed me his life savings because he got fooled?" Victoria felt the stillness in her chest deepen into something colder. "Raymond didn't just invest with me," Carter continued, watching her face with the focus of someone looking for the exact spot where a nail will go in. "He helped me. He brought people in. Deacon Phillips, your Aunt Patricia, half the church board. Every time I needed a new round, I'd take Raymond to a lunch or a dinner, and he'd make the introductions. I paid him a referral fee, 3% on every dollar that came in through his connections." He let that sit. He knew what I was doing wasn't exactly conventional. He didn't ask too many questions because he wanted his $480,000 back before the music stopped. He was going to get out clean and let everyone else hold the bag. The room was very quiet. Victoria looked at Carter Webb, this man who had walked into her father's life and her sister's life and her community's life and treated all of it as raw material. She felt the particular quality of anger that comes not from surprise, but from confirmation. The anger of having your worst suspicion proven precisely correct. "You just told me all of that," she said, "in my office, with my security cameras recording." Carter's eyes moved to the small camera mounted above the door, back to her. The color that had returned to his face over the last few minutes drained away again. I would strongly suggest, Victoria said, that you hire a criminal defense attorney tonight, not a civil litigator, a criminal defense attorney. Carter stood up. His chair scraped back against the floor. He snatched the papers from the desk, seemed to think better of it, dropped them back. He adjusted his tie, a reflexive, pointless gesture, straightening something that was well beyond straightening. He walked to the door, stopped with his hand on the frame. "If you go to the feds," he said, his voice low and stripped of everything except the plain shape of a threat, "that $480,000 is gone. The house goes with it. Your parents will be on the street, and that'll be on you, Victoria. That'll be completely on you." He left without closing the door behind him. Victoria listened to his footsteps go down the hallway and disappear. She heard the elevator chime. Then nothing. She turned to her computer, pulled up the security system management portal, located the camera feed for her office, confirmed that the recording had captured the full conversation, audio and video stored automatically to her company's encrypted cloud backup from the moment anyone entered the space. She exported the file, saved it in 3 separate locations. Then she called her attorney. "Sarah, I need 30 minutes tomorrow morning. First thing, I have something you need to hear." She hung up, sat back in her chair. Outside the windows, Houston was doing what Houston did in the early June evening. The sky going orange and copper over the western skyline, the heat of the day releasing slowly, the city settling into its nighttime version of itself. The gala was 10 days away. She had work to do. She had thought carefully about what to wear, not out of vanity. Victoria had never been particularly interested in vanity, but because she understood in the precise and unsentimental way she understood most things, that appearance was a form of communication. What you wore to a room told that room something before you opened your mouth, and tonight she needed the room to receive the right message before she said a single word. She chose a floor-length gown in deep emerald green, structured at the shoulders and fitted through the body, with a neckline that was elegant without being effortful. Her hair was down. She almost never wore it down for professional occasions, which was exactly why she wore it down tonight. Low heels, because she would be on her feet for hours and she intended to move through that room efficiently. Simple gold earrings, no other jewelry. She looked, she decided, checking her reflection in the elevator mirror on the way down from her penthouse, like a woman who owned the building. Not like a woman who was trying to prove anything. Just ownership, settled and complete. The drive to River Oaks took 12 minutes. She had timed it. River Oaks Country Club was the kind of institution that had been in Houston since 1923 and intended to remain until the city sank into the Gulf of Mexico. The main ballroom had coffered ceilings and a parquet floor that had been refinished 14 times and still looked like the first time. The members paid dues that the club did not publish and attended events that the club did not advertise, and the whole enterprise operated on a studied, comfortable exclusivity that Carter Webb had spent 3 years trying to infiltrate and had finally managed by leveraging Raymond Simmons' existing social connections. Tonight, the ballroom had been dressed up in navy blue and gold, Webb Capital Advisors colors, which Victoria had only just learned existed. Banners hung from the upper gallery rail. A string quartet was set up in the far corner. The buffet table had a centerpiece ice sculpture in the shape of what was supposed to be a bull, the financial symbol of optimism and rising markets, though the thing had been melting for at least an hour and looked more like a large, sad dog. Victoria paid her $500 charity admission at the door, cash to a young woman in a navy blazer who stamped her hand without looking up, and stepped into the room. She estimated 80 guests. The demographic was almost exactly what she'd expected. Predominantly Black professionals in their 50s and 60s, the core of the community Raymond had spent 3 decades building relationships in. Church members, small business owners, retired city workers, a handful of younger couples who had probably been brought in by the older generation. A few white faces, dentists, she guessed, or contractors, the kind of local professionals who moved in the same country club orbit without being embedded in the same community network. Carter was working the room with the focused intensity of a man who understood that tonight was the most important performance of his career. He was in a midnight blue suit that fit impeccably and holding a glass of something amber that Victoria suspected was apple juice. Carter was too controlled a performer to drink at a professional event. He was laughing at things people said and leaning in close when they spoke, and touching arms and shoulders with the practiced ease of a natural salesman who had long ago stopped distinguishing between genuine warmth and its simulation. Raymond was at the head table, third whiskey of the evening already in hand, holding court with 3 men from the golf club. He was wearing the counterfeit Rolex. Of course he was. Gloria and Destiny were at the bar. Destiny was in a red dress that required structural engineering to stay up, and she was photographing everything within arm's reach. Gloria was in church-appropriate navy, and she had the pinched, watchful look of a woman who spent social occasions monitoring everyone else's behavior for potential embarrassment. It was Gloria who saw Victoria first. She clocked her from 15 feet away, across the flow of moving bodies and cocktail glasses, and Victoria watched her mother's face do the specific thing it always did when surprised, a brief, unguarded flash of something genuine before the managed response came down over it like a shade. In that half second, before Gloria composed herself, Victoria saw fear. Not anger. Fear. Then Gloria grabbed Destiny's arm, and the two of them came across the room with the coordinated efficiency of a security team that had identified a threat. "What in the entire world are you doing here?" Gloria said, arriving at a distance calculated for private conversation in a public space, close enough to hiss, far enough to look from across the room like a normal family greeting. "I told you specifically." "Hi, Mom," Victoria said pleasantly. "You look nice." "Don't you hi Mom me right now. This is Carter and Destiny's event, and you were not invited, and you need to leave before—" "I donated $500 at the door," Victoria said, "which makes me a registered supporter of the Web Capital Cares Foundation, a public charity event. I'm afraid you can't ask me to leave without creating exactly the kind of scene you're trying to avoid." Destiny stepped in, eyes hard. "Chica, I am not playing with you tonight. Carter is about to close the biggest funding round of his career, and you are not going to stand here with your bad energy and your little agenda and—" "Destiny," Victoria said quietly, "I love you. I genuinely do. And I need you to trust me that the best thing you can do tonight is not draw attention to this conversation." Something in her tone, not threatening, not emotional, just very, very steady, stopped Destiny mid-sentence. She opened her mouth, closed it. Victoria smiled at them both and stepped around them into the room. She started with Deacon Harold Phillips. He was standing near the beverage table with a glass of sparkling water, talking to another older man Victoria didn't recognize. He turned when she approached, and his face opened into the broad, warm smile of someone encountering a familiar face in an unexpected place. "Victoria Simmons!" "Lord, child, how are you? I haven't seen you since your company's Christmas thing last year." "I'm well, Deacon Phillips. How are you?" "Blessed and highly favored." He patted her hand. "You here to support Carter's fund? Your daddy's been telling everyone at church about it. Says it's the best financial decision he ever made." Victoria kept her expression warm and slightly thoughtful, the expression of someone who cares enough to raise a gentle concern. "I heard, and I know Carter's projected some impressive numbers. I just want to make sure everyone's doing their due diligence, you know? In my line of work, I see a lot of investment structures. Can I ask, has Carter provided the quarterly SEC disclosure filings for the fund? The standard Form ADV?" Deacon Phillips blinked. What now?" "Form ADV. It's the federal document that any registered investment advisor has to file with the SEC. It lists the fund's assets under management, the fee structure, any disciplinary history. It's public record. You can pull it up yourself on the SEC's IAPD database. Every legitimate private fund manager is required to maintain a current filing." "He gave us a brochure," Deacon Phillips said slowly. "And a login for a website where we can see our account balances." Victoria nodded, kept her voice gentle. "Account balance websites are very easy to build, Deacon. You can program them to display any number you want. The Form ADV is different. It's a federal filing, it's independently verified, and it's the baseline document you should have in hand before you invest $1 with anyone." A pause. "I just asked him about it tonight. Just ask to see it. If he's registered, he'll have it ready. It's completely standard." Deacon Phillips was looking at her with the focused attention of a man who had just been told something that had reorganized several months of comfortable assumptions. "You think something's wrong with—" "I think everyone should ask the questions they have a right to ask," Victoria said. "That's all." She touched his arm briefly. "It was so good to see you." She moved on. She worked the room for 40 minutes. She spoke to Aunt Patricia about the FINRA broker check database and the 30 seconds it took to verify whether an advisor had a valid license. She asked James Whitfield, the bakery owner, whether he'd requested the fund's audited financial statements, Not internal statements, James, independent audited statements from a third-party CPA firm, which any legitimate fund will provide on request. She found the retired schoolteacher Beverly Okafor and asked, with genuine seeming curiosity, whether she'd noticed that Webb Capital Advisors' registered address was a Delaware mailbox service rather than a physical office. Not necessarily a red flag on its own, Victoria said, but combined with some of the other things I've been hearing, I just want to verify. She planted no accusations. She raised no alarms. She simply asked the questions that these kind, trusting people had never thought to ask. Questions that, once asked, could not be unasked, because they had the particular quality of questions that revealed, in the asking, that the answers probably didn't exist. And she watched the room change temperature. It happened gradually and then quickly, the way all significant shifts happen. A small cluster forming here, 2 people pulling out phones there, a whispered conference in the corner near the ice sculpture. The string quartet kept playing, but the music was being drowned out by something quieter and more urgent. People who had been relaxed and receptive 20 minutes ago were now leaning toward each other with furrowed brows and the particular tight-shouldered body language of people who have just realized they might have made a very serious mistake. Carter noticed it from across the room. She saw the exact moment he registered that something was wrong. He was in the middle of what looked like a promising conversation with a well-dressed man she didn't recognize, potential new investor almost certainly, and she watched Carter's eyes do a slow sweep of the room, reading the energy, and then find her. She was standing near the tall windows on the east side of the ballroom, holding a glass of sparkling water, looking directly back at him. She raised her glass a fraction of an inch. Carter's expression underwent a rapid and comprehensive transformation. The charm evaporated. What was underneath it was not attractive. A hot, rigid fury, edged with something that looked very much like panic trying to disguise itself as anger. He said something to the man he'd been talking to, a quick apologetic smile, and then crossed the room with the kind of speed that looks controlled but isn't, shouldering through a cluster of guests near the buffet, grabbing Raymond by the elbow as he passed the head table and pulling him along. Raymond stumbled slightly as Carter dragged him across the parquet floor, whiskey in hand, looking confused, and then, as he located Victoria near the windows, looking furious. They arrived in front of her like a delegation from a country that had just had its borders violated. "What the hell is your problem?" Raymond said, loud enough that the 6 people immediately around them went quiet and turned. He either didn't notice or didn't care. I specifically told you this event was not for you. You don't belong here, Victoria. You are embarrassing this family. Dad, Victoria said, keeping her voice at a normal conversational volume. I came here because I care about the people in this room. Deacon Phillips invested his entire city pension with Carter's fund. Aunt Patricia put in her house money. Beverly Okafor, that is none of your business. It's absolutely my business when the people being recruited are people I've known my whole life. Still calm. Still even. And when my father helped recruit them, knowing that the fund was paying old investors with new investor money. The silence that followed was the kind that has texture, the kind you can feel against your skin. Raymond's face went through something complicated. The fury was still there, but underneath it something else had moved, a flash of something that might have been shame, quickly and completely buried, and then it was gone, replaced by a heat that had no room in it for anything except itself. You shut your mouth, he said. His voice had dropped, which somehow made it worse. You shut your lying mouth right now. You don't know what you're talking about, and you never have. You've always been like this. Always trying to tear this family down because you can't stand to see anyone else doing well. You're a miserable, bitter woman, and I am sick to death of... He raised his right hand. The crack of the slap was shockingly loud in the ballroom. It snapped her head to the side and sent her water glass falling from her fingers to shatter on the parquet floor in a bright, percussive explosion of crystal. The string quartet stopped playing. Every person in the room froze. Victoria stood with her head turned to the side, her left cheek burning, the taste of blood from her inner lip spreading across her tongue. She didn't move for 3 full seconds. Then, slowly, she turned her head back. She looked at her father. Raymond was standing with his hands still raised, breathing hard, chest heaving. Around them, 80 people stood in absolute stillness. Raymond? A man's voice from somewhere to the left, older, heavy with authority. Deacon Phillips. Raymond, what did you just do? Raymond lowered his hand. His eyes were moving now, across the room, reading the faces, registering what he saw there. Not sympathy, not the tribal closing of ranks that he had always been able to count on from his community. Just people looking at him with the particular expression people wear when they have seen something they cannot unsee. Victoria reached up with her thumb and wiped the small bead of blood from the corner of her lip. She looked at it. Then she looked at her father. "You just cut your only lifeline," she said quietly. Her voice was perfectly steady, not performing steadiness, not working at it, just steady, the way a wall is steady. "I want you to know that." And she looked at her mother, who had appeared from somewhere in the crowd and was standing with both hands pressed to her mouth. She looked at Destiny, who was staring at Raymond with an expression Victoria had never seen on her sister's face before. Something cracked open in it, something that looked almost like seeing clearly for the first time. Then she turned around and walked to the door. She did not hurry. She did not look back. She walked across the parquet floor through the silence of 80 people and out through the double doors into the marble lobby of River Oaks Country Club and out the front entrance into the warm Houston night, where the valet took one look at her face and immediately reached for his radio. "Ma'am, can I—" "I'm fine," she said. "I have my own car. Thank you." She stood on the front steps for a moment. The night air was warm and still and smelled of cut grass and distant rain. She breathed it in. Then she walked to her car and drove home. Victoria was at her desk reviewing a lease renewal when the breaking news alert pushed to her desktop. Local fund manager arrested in multi-million-dollar fraud scheme. Live coverage. She clicked the link. The news helicopter footage was extraordinary in its mundane precision. A quiet suburban street in a well-kept Dallas neighborhood, the kind of street where nothing dramatic had ever happened, and the Homeowners Association newsletter was the most read document in the community. On that street, in front of a white colonial with black shutters and a 3-car garage, 12 federal vehicles had arranged themselves in the casual, inexorable geometry of a large institution making a point. FBI, SEC, 2 Harris County Sheriff vehicles that had driven up from Houston, a forensic accounting team van, agents in navy windbreakers with yellow lettering moved in and out of the front door carrying brown cardboard boxes, desktop computers, filing boxes. What looked like a framed wall display that Carter had kept in his home office. The kind of thing that displayed certifications and licenses, Victoria noted, that didn't exist. The news anchor's voice. Carter Webb, 38, of Dallas, Texas, is being taken into federal custody this morning on 14 counts, including wire fraud, securities fraud, mail fraud, and operation of an illegal investment scheme across multiple states. Federal prosecutors allege that Webb solicited more than $2.3 million from at least 34 investors, many of them elderly members of Houston area churches and community organizations, using fraudulent promises of returns that were never generated. The ground camera found Carter at the front door. Gray sweatpants, white t-shirt, no suit, no watch, no practiced smile. His hands were secured behind his back with standard issue metal cuffs that caught the morning sun for a moment as the agents walked him down the front steps. His head was down, his shoulders pulled inward, the body language of a person trying to take up as little space as possible in a world that was, at that moment, paying very close attention to him. Behind him, Destiny appeared on the porch. She was in pajamas. Her hair was loose and uncombed, and she was holding a designer handbag against her chest with both arms the way a child holds a stuffed animal for comfort, for the tactile reassurance of something familiar when everything else has become unrecognizable. She shouted something at the reporters. Victoria couldn't hear it over the anchor's narration. And then one of the agents said something to her, and she stopped shouting and just stood there on the porch of her beautiful house watching her husband get loaded into a federal vehicle. Victoria turned off the live feed. She sat in the quiet of her office. Outside the windows, Houston went about its Tuesday morning. Her phone rang. Gloria. She looked at the screen for 2 rings. Then she picked it up. Monday, July 22nd, 2024, 9:31 a.m. Her mother didn't speak for almost 8 seconds after Victoria answered. Just breathing, ragged and wet, the breathing of someone who had been crying for a while and hadn't stopped. Victoria? Gloria's voice was barely there, thinned down to almost nothing. We're gonna lose the house. Victoria said nothing. She waited. The bank. The lender sent a certified letter last week, 3 months behind. They're starting foreclosure proceedings. Carter's accounts are all frozen by the federal order and your daddy's money is just, it's gone. It's all gone, Victoria. Everything we had. Still, Victoria waited. Baby, I know. Gloria's voice broke on the word. I know what we said to you. I know what your daddy did at that dinner and at the club. I know, but you are our daughter. You are our flesh and blood, and we are going to be on the street, and I don't know what else to do except call you." Victoria looked out the window. A red-tailed hawk was riding a thermal above the downtown towers, circling without effort, completely still at the center of its own motion. "Mom," she said, "how much is outstanding on the loan?" "The principal plus the fees and penalties is, they said $494,000. And the house is worth?" "The last appraisal was," Raymond said, "around $650, maybe $670. Victoria did the math without effort. Significant equity position. A motivated lender who wanted their money, not the property. A foreclosure auction that would attract every distressed property investor in Houston. All of them looking to buy low and flip fast. None of them interested in the fact that a 71-year-old man and his wife had lived in that house for 35 years. "I hear you, Mom," Victoria said. "Gloria, will you help us?" Gloria whispered. "Please." A long pause. "I'll look into the situation," Victoria said. "That's all I can promise right now." She ended the call. She sat very still for a moment. Then she opened her property records database and pulled up 4417 Bel Air Oak Drive. The foreclosure filing had been initiated 4 days ago. The auction date had been set for Monday, August 5th, 2 weeks away. The opening bid would be set by the lender at the outstanding balance plus fees, approximately $498,000. Victoria looked at that number for a long time. Then she opened a new document and started writing notes. Clean, organized, bullet-pointed, the way she always started when she was building a strategy. She wrote for 22 minutes without stopping. When she was done, she read through what she'd written once, made 2 small edits, saved the document under a file name that, if anyone had been looking over her shoulder, would have seemed entirely unremarkable: Bel Air Property Acquisition Analysis. She closed the document. Then she called her attorney and scheduled a meeting for Thursday morning. The call came from her receptionist at 10 minutes to 5, when most of the floor had already gone quiet for the weekend. "Ms. Simmons, there are 3 people here. They don't have an appointment: an older gentleman, an older woman, and a younger woman. The gentleman says his name is Raymond Simmons and that you'll want to see him." A pause in which Victoria could hear, faintly, her father's voice in the background. Not the words, just the cadence, the particular rhythm of a man accustomed to being waited on who was currently being made to wait. "Give me 2 minutes," Victoria said, "then send them back." She closed the document she was working on, straightened the items on her desk, not from nervousness, just from habit, the same way she straightened things before any meeting that mattered. She folded her hands on the glass surface and faced the door. They came in the order she expected. Raymond first, then Gloria close behind him, then Destiny trailing at the back with her arms wrapped around herself like she was cold, though the office was a perfectly comfortable 72 degrees. Raymond looked like a man who had been disassembled and put back together by someone working from memory. The physical structure was the same: broad shoulders, strong jaw, the bearing of someone who had spent decades believing his presence alone commanded a room. But the surface of him had changed. His clothes were wrong: khaki pants with a small stain at the knee, a polo shirt that had been washed too many times, sneakers instead of the leather dress shoes he had worn every day of Victoria's childhood. He held his cap in both hands in front of him, turning it slowly by the brim. He did not look at the view. He did not look at the framed deal tombstones on the wall or the company awards on the shelf behind her. He looked at the floor, then at her, then at the floor again. Gloria had made an effort. She was in a church blouse and pressed slacks, but her face had the hollowed quality of someone who had not been sleeping. Her eyes went immediately to Victoria's and stayed there, reading, calculating, hoping. Destiny sat down in one of the guest chairs without being invited and stared at the glass desk with the blank expression of someone whose internal processor was running too many simultaneous tasks to generate an outward response. Raymond sat in the other chair. He put his cap on his knee. He cleared his throat. And then he began. Victoria had heard versions of this speech before. Not this specific speech, not with this specific situation wrapped around it. But the architecture of it was familiar. The load-bearing walls were in the same places they always were. She recognized it the way you recognize a song you haven't heard in years from the first 4 notes. Family, blood, the storms that test us, God's expectation of forgiveness, what it means to be raised right, the sacrifices her parents had made, the roof over her head and the food on the table and the years they gave. Raymond delivered it without looking up for the first 3 minutes. When he did look up, his eyes were wet, which Victoria noted with the detached precision of someone taking inventory. She had seen her father cry twice in her life, once at his own mother's funeral and once during a particularly affecting sermon at church. And both times the tears had been genuine and brief, and he had seemed faintly embarrassed by them afterward. These tears were different. These tears had been prepared. Gloria added texture. The medical dimension, Raymond's blood pressure, the stress on his heart, the doctor's warnings about cortisol and hypertension in men his age. The spiritual dimension, she had been praying, Victoria, every single morning, laying this situation at the feet of the Lord. The practical dimension, they had nowhere to go. No family in Houston with space to take them in. No savings left. No vehicle because the car they'd been driving was a lease in Carter's name that had already been repossessed by the dealership. "We're not asking for charity," Raymond said, his voice doing the thing voices do when they are trying to sound proud and humble at the same time and cannot quite manage either. "We're asking for a loan. You buy the house at the auction Monday. Keep it as an investment property. That's fine. That makes sense for your business. And then you transfer the deed to us and we'll pay you back. We'll sign whatever paper you want. A promissory note, a repayment schedule, anything. I'll sign it right now if you've got the paperwork." Destiny, who had been silent the entire time, uncrossed and recrossed her arms. "This is partially your fault anyway," she said, and then seemed to remember that she was here to ask for something and rerouted the sentence. "I mean, look, if you had just not shown up to the gala, Carter might have gotten enough new investors to cover—" "Destiny!" Gloria's voice was a single sharp syllable. Destiny closed her mouth. Victoria had not said a word for 11 minutes. She had sat with her hands folded on the desk and listened to all of it, every word, every pause, every recalibration. She had watched her father's hands turn his cap by the brim. She had watched her mother's eyes stay fixed on her face, searching for the opening, the softening, the familiar capitulation that had always come eventually. Now she let the silence sit for a few seconds after Destiny's aborted sentence. Let it settle. Then she unfolded her hands, leaned back slightly in her chair, and let a slow, considering expression cross her face. The expression of someone working through an internal conflict and arriving, with visible effort, at a generous conclusion. "You know what, Dad?" she said. Her voice was quiet and measured. "You're right. Family is family. I can't sit here and watch you lose the house you've lived in for 35 years. Raymond's head came up. She continued. "I'll be at the courthouse at 9. Simmons Capital Group has the liquidity to outbid whatever the bank's opening number is, and I'll make sure no outside investor walks away with that property." Gloria pressed both hands to her mouth. Her shoulders dropped 2 inches. Raymond let out a long, slow breath, the specific exhalation of a man releasing pressure he has been holding for weeks. He started to stand, arms opening, moving toward her. Victoria stood up behind her desk and picked up a pen, making a small show of writing a note on her legal pad. She stayed on her side of the desk. 9 o'clock Monday, she said. "Wait for me outside the auction room. Only registered bidders can be in the room, so I'll need you to wait in the hallway. I'll come out when it's done." Raymond sat back down, nodded with the sheepish, grateful nod of a man who has been rescued from something he created himself and has the self-awareness to know it, but not quite enough to say so out loud. "Thank you, Victoria," Gloria said, her voice cracked. "I always knew—" "Monday at 9, Victoria said again, gently but finally. "I have work to finish tonight." She walked around the desk and toward the door, not dismissive, just purposeful, the host indicating that the meeting was complete. They filed out. Raymond first, then Gloria, then Destiny, who paused in the doorway and looked at Victoria for a moment with an expression that was hard to read, something between relief and assessment, as if she was still running the numbers. "Monday," Victoria said to her. Destiny nodded and went. Victoria listened to their footsteps go down the hall, heard the elevator chime, heard faintly her mother's voice floating back. Not the words, just the tone, warm and relieved, the sound of someone already planning the celebration. She stood in the empty hallway outside her office for a moment. Then she went back to her desk, opened the document she'd been working on, and kept going. The morning was gray and heavy, the sky the color of old concrete, the kind of Houston summer morning where the heat was already fully present at 8 a.m. but hadn't yet reached its afternoon viciousness. Victoria parked in the courthouse garage at 8:41. She sat in her car for 4 minutes, not hesitating, just completing the internal process of transition that she always performed before significant moments, the same mental clearing that preceded her most important negotiations. She was wearing her best charcoal suit, the one she'd had tailored 2 years ago that fit precisely the way clothes should fit when you need to feel like the most capable person in any room you walk into. Her briefcase contained the certified corporate bank drafts, 2 of them, issued against Simmons Capital Group's operating account for amounts that covered any realistic outcome of today's bidding. The corporate operating agreement, her Texas real estate broker's license, her state ID. A single legal pad with 3 pages of handwritten notes. She took the elevator to the 3rd floor. They were on the wooden bench outside the auction room, exactly where she'd told them to be. Raymond stood up when he saw her coming down the marble corridor. The immediate, almost involuntary standing of someone who has been waiting with anxious energy and finally has somewhere to put it. Gloria was on her feet a half second later. Destiny stayed seated a moment longer, then stood. "You made it," Raymond said, and there was something in his voice that Victoria recognized as the closest he was going to come, in this lifetime, to expressing gratitude without qualification. "I said I would," she replied. "How's it going to go in there?" he asked. "I'll take care of it." She looked at all 3 of them. Her father in his best available clothes, her mother clutching a small purse with both hands, her sister with dark circles under her eyes that no amount of concealer had fully addressed. "Wait here. I'll be out when it's done." She pushed through the double doors. The auction room was the study in fluorescent lighting and institutional pragmatism. Rows of plastic chairs, a raised platform at the front with a county clerk's desk and a wooden podium, American and Texas flags flanking the far wall. Every seat was taken. These were professionals, almost exclusively. Victoria recognized the type immediately, the same way she recognized herself in certain business contexts. Property investors, flippers, attorneys representing institutional buyers. A few individuals who had the particular alertness of people who had done this before and knew how fast things moved. They looked at her the way they always looked at her in these rooms, with an evaluating curiosity that she had long since stopped bothering to be bothered by. She took a seat in the middle section, registered her bidder number, 31, set her briefcase on her lap. The clerk worked through the list methodically. 14 properties before the Simmons address, each one disposed of in 3 to 7 minutes. Victoria sat and watched and tracked the rhythm of the room, how the regulars bid, where they hesitated, what numbers made them fold. She was reading the room the way she read all rooms, for the information it was offering if you paid close enough attention. "Parcel 2247-B, the clerk said. 4417 Bel Air Oak Drive, Houston, Texas 77401. Single-family residential, 4 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, lot size 0.34 acres. Opening bid set by the lien holder at $498,000. An older man in the front row, gray blazer, reading glasses, the unhurried posture of someone who had bought at least 40 properties at auction, raised his paddle. 498. A younger man near the back wall leaning against it with his arms crossed. 510. Front row, 525. Back wall, 540. 2 more bidders entered. The number climbed with the mechanical efficiency of a market finding its level. 550, 565, 580, 590. The older man in the front row had the patience of someone with deep pockets and no emotional stake. The younger man at the back was calculating on his phone between bids. The number slowed at 610,000. The younger man shook his head and pushed off the wall. The remaining bidders exchanged glances. 610, the clerk said. Going once, Victoria raised paddle 31. $690,000. The room went still. Not the polite pause before continuing stillness of normal bidding. The genuine, total stillness of a room that has just had its assumptions recalibrated. Jumping the price by $80,000 in a single bid was not a negotiating tactic. It was a termination. It said, clearly and without ambiguity, "I will pay whatever this requires, and I have already decided I am leaving here with this property." The older man in the front row looked at her for a moment, lowered his paddle. The room stayed quiet. 690,000, the clerk said. Going once, going twice. The gavel came down with a clean, decisive crack. Sold bidder number 31. Victoria walked to the clerk's desk. She produced the bank draft, the corporate documentation, her ID. The clerk processed everything with the brisk efficiency of someone who had done this 1,000 times. The stamp came down on the deed of sale. Heavy and final, the sound of a door closing. The clerk slid the document across the desk. Congratulations, ma'am. Simmons Capital Group, LLC is now the sole legal owner of the property. The current occupants have been served notice and have 30 days from today's date to vacate. Thank you, Victoria said. She put the deed in her briefcase, closed the clasp, picked it up, turned around, walked back down the center aisle through the quiet room and pushed through the double doors into the marble hallway. Raymond was on his feet before the doors had fully swung open. His face was transformed. The tension of the last hour had broken, and what was underneath it was pure, unguarded relief, the face of a man who had been pulled back from an edge and knew it. Well? He took 2 steps toward her. Did you get it? Did the bank? Are we good? Gloria was right behind him, hands clasped, eyes bright. Even Destiny had uncrossed her arms. Victoria stopped in front of them. She set her briefcase down, reached in and removed the deed of sale. The stamped, certified document with the county seal on the front page, still warm from the clerk's processing. She held it up so they could see the text clearly. I stopped the auction, she said. I paid $690,000 in certified corporate funds. The bank no longer owns the property. Raymond laughed, a single booming release sound that echoed off the marble. He clapped his hands together. I knew it. I knew you wouldn't. The property, Victoria continued in the same even tone, is now owned by Simmons Capital Group, LLC. She lowered the document. I'm not transferring it to you, Dad. The laugh stopped. Raymond blinked, as if the sentence had been spoken in a language he almost but didn't quite speak. What? I told you I would use Simmons Capital Group's funds to bid on the property and make sure the bank didn't sell it to a stranger. I used those exact words. I kept that exact promise. She held his gaze without flinching. I did not promise to give it back to you. Victoria! Gloria's voice had gone to a frequency Victoria had never heard from her before. Not the practiced warmth, not the pointed whisper, not the righteous outrage. Just a woman's voice, stripped of all its tools. Victoria, that is our home. It was your home, Victoria said. You borrowed $480,000 against it and gave that money to a con man that multiple people, including me, warned you about. The bank took it. I bought it from the bank. Those are the facts. You can't do this, Raymond said. The relief had drained from his face completely, and what replaced it moved through several stages. Confusion, disbelief, and then the familiar anger, hot and immediate, rising like a tide that had been held back for weeks and had finally found its opening. You can't just... We had an agreement. You sat in your office on Friday and you said... I said exactly what I said, Dad. Not one word more. That is our house. His voice had gone up, carrying down the marble hallway, turning heads among the lawyers and clerks moving through the corridor. I built my life in that house. 35 years. You cannot buy my house and just keep it like some kind of business asset? Victoria said quietly. Yes, that's what it is now. She reached back into her briefcase and produced a white envelope. She held it out toward her father. He stared at it without taking it. She set it on the bench beside him. That's a formal notice of property recovery. You have 30 days from today to remove your belongings and vacate the premises. If you need help finding housing, Simmons Capital Group manages several rental properties in Midtown and the 3rd Ward. I'll ask my property manager to give your application standard processing, same as any other applicant. Raymond lunged, not toward the envelope, toward her. His hands came up, and the 2 Harris County Courthouse security officers who had been stationed at the end of the hall were moving before he'd taken a full step, both of them interposing themselves with the calm, practiced efficiency of people who were paid to prevent exactly this. Sir, she stole my house! Raymond's voice filled the corridor, raw and cracking, the voice of a man from whom something structural had just been removed. She is standing right here and she stole my house, right out from under me, with her corporate money. Sir, I need you to step back. Let go of me. She is my daughter. She... Gloria had sat down on the bench. She wasn't crying dramatically. She was just sitting, with her purse on her lap and her hands folded over it, staring at the middle distance with the expression of someone who has arrived at a conclusion they had been avoiding for a long time. Destiny was standing very still against the far wall. She was looking at Raymond, not at Victoria, not at the floor, but at their father, with an expression that was entirely new on her face, something that might, given time and distance, eventually become clarity. Victoria picked up her briefcase. She looked at her father, still being held back by the 2 security officers, still calling after her, his voice reverberating off the courthouse marble in a way that made the passers-by stop and stare. She looked at him for a long, still moment, not with hatred, not with satisfaction exactly, with the particular quality of attention you give to something you are seeing clearly, possibly for the first time. "I love you, Dad," she said. She meant it. That was the thing that would take her the longest to explain to people later when she tried to find the words for it. She meant it completely, in the specific and limited way you can love someone who has spent decades making you smaller. The way you love the idea of what something could have been while accepting, finally and without cruelty, that it never was and isn't going to be. She turned and walked toward the elevators. Behind her, Raymond's voice. "Victoria, Victoria, you come back here. I am your father. You come back here right now." The elevator doors opened. She stepped in. The doors closed. The last thing she heard as the elevator descended was the echo of her own name bouncing off the marble walls of the Harris County Courthouse, getting farther away, getting quieter, and then disappearing entirely into the sound of the building going about its business. She did not drive to the house on the day of the eviction. She had considered it, had in fact spent a week telling herself she wouldn't go and then quietly acknowledging that she probably would. But when the morning of October 2nd arrived and she was drinking her coffee at the kitchen island, she realized she didn't need to see it. She had seen enough. The courthouse hallway had been enough. She sent her property management team instead. Standard procedure, professionally executed. 2 Harris County Sheriff deputies for legal oversight, a moving crew for any belongings that hadn't been packed, a locksmith to rekey the property immediately upon vacancy. Her property manager, a competent and unflappable woman named Charisse, texted her at 11:47 a.m. Property cleared and secured, clients removed without incident, keys in lockbox. Victoria read the text, typed back, "Thank you," put the phone in her pocket, went back to work. The days that followed were quiet in the way that spaces are quiet after something loud has been in them for a long time. The family group chat, which had been a source of constant low-grade noise in her life for years, announcements, complaints, guilt deployments, the occasional genuine piece of news, simply stopped. No messages, no calls. The silence had the clean, specific quality of a door that has been properly closed. She was aware, through the peripheral information that reaches everyone in a tight-knit community, whether they seek it out or not, of the broad outlines of what was happening in the wreckage of her family's situation. Raymond and Gloria had moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in Pasadena, not the part of Pasadena anyone chose voluntarily, the part you ended up in when your options had narrowed to a specific geometry. A cousin had co-signed the lease, which the cousin would regret or not, depending on factors outside Victoria's knowledge or control. Destiny had filed for a divorce in August, and it had been finalized with unusual speed in November. Driven by Destiny's urgent desire to legally distance herself from Carter's financial exposure before the federal asset forfeiture proceedings extended to marital property. She had moved back to Houston and was staying with Gloria, which meant she was staying with Gloria and Raymond in a 2-bedroom apartment, a living arrangement that the laws of physics and family dynamics suggested was unlikely to be peaceful. Carter Webb had pled not guilty in August and changed his plea to guilty in October after his court-appointed attorney reviewed the evidence the federal prosecutors had assembled and advised him in the clearest possible terms that a trial would be a formality with a predetermined conclusion. Sentencing was scheduled for the following spring. And then, on a Tuesday in early November, Victoria's attorney forwarded her a document from the federal prosecutor's office. She opened it at her desk, read it once, read it again, set it down. The document was a summary of findings from the SEC's forensic accounting investigation into Webb Capital Advisors. In the course of reviewing Carter's financial records, investigators had identified a series of payments, structured as consulting fees, made from a Webb Capital Advisors subsidiary account to a personal checking account in Raymond Simmons' name. 17 payments over 14 months, amounts ranging from $2,100 to $4,800. Total, $47,200. The payment pattern correlated precisely with the dates of significant new investor referrals, each payment arriving within 2 weeks of a new investor introduction that Raymond had facilitated. 3% of referred investment capital, paid as a referral fee, deposited quietly into a checking account that Gloria had not known existed. Raymond Simmons had not simply been a trusting investor who had been deceived by his son-in-law. He had been a paid participant. He had known, or had deliberately chosen not to know, that the fund was fraudulent. He had introduced Deacon Phillips and Aunt Patricia and Beverly Okafor and James Whitfield, people who trusted him, people who had known him for decades, people who had sat in the same pews and eaten at the same tables and watched each other's children grow up, and he had collected a fee for every one of them. He had planned to get out before the collapse. He had expected his $480,000 back plus returns, his referral fees pocketed quietly, and the community members he'd recruited left holding the bag. Victoria sat with that information for a long time. She thought about Deacon Phillips, 72 years old, 40 years of transit work, $340,000 gone. She thought about Aunt Patricia's house money. She thought about Beverly Okafor and James Whitfield, whose names she had read in a fraud report on a Thursday evening in May with the particular sick feeling of recognition that comes from seeing familiar things in unfamiliar contexts. She thought about her father standing in the courthouse hallway shouting her name as the elevator closed. She did not cry. She had done her crying for this family a long time ago in smaller and more private moments, and she had nothing left to spend on it now. What she felt instead was something quieter and more permanent, a settling, the way a building settles when the last piece of its foundation is finally irreversibly in place. She picked up the phone and called her attorney. "I saw the document," she said. "I'm sorry, Victoria," Sarah said. I'm sorry." "And what's his exposure?" "Federal prosecutors have offered him a cooperation agreement." He's already been cooperating, actually, which is part of why Carter's case moved so fast. In exchange for full cooperation and return of the referral fees, they're not pursuing criminal charges against Raymond. He'll be on a financial supervision order for 5 years and prohibited from any investment advisory activity for 10. He has to repay the $47,200 to the victim's fund. And he accepted? He signed the agreement last week. Victoria nodded slowly, though there was no one to see it. "Okay," she said. "Thank you, Sarah." She hung up, opened her email, typed a brief message to the Federal Victims Fund coordinator whose contact information had been included in the document, asking about the process for making an additional voluntary contribution to the fund on behalf of Simmons Capital Group. Not a large amount, not a gesture designed to be noticed or credited. Just money going toward the people it should have reached in the first place. She sent the email, closed her laptop, stood up, went to the window, looked at Houston in the gray November afternoon. Her father had looked her in the eyes at a country club gala and called her bitter and jealous and struck her in front of 80 people. He had done it because she was about to expose something he had built his recent life around protecting. Not just Carter's scheme, but his own role in it, his own quiet, carefully deniable complicity. She had been right about all of it, not in a way that felt like victory, just in a way that felt like the truth finally, with nothing left on top of it. She stood at the window for a while longer. Then she went back to her desk and finished the day's work. Carter Webb was sentenced on the morning of Thursday, March 6, 2025, in the United States District Court for the Southern District of Texas. Victoria did not attend. She had considered it. Her attorney had offered to get her a seat in the public gallery, and there had been a version of herself some months earlier who would have wanted to be in that room, who would have needed to see it. But somewhere between November and March, that need had quietly dissolved, the way pain sometimes dissolves not because it's been resolved, but because the body has simply finished processing it and moved on to something else. She was in her office when the verdict came through, or rather, when Sarah called to relay the sentence. Since it wasn't a verdict, it was a plea, and the only real question had been the number. 11 years. Federal prison, no possibility of parole for the first 8.5. Mandatory restitution of the full $2.3 million to be paid from any assets not already seized, with the remainder converted to a civil judgment that would follow him for the rest of his financially active life. 11 years, Victoria said. 11 years, Sarah confirmed. The judge made a point of noting the specific targeting of elderly community members and the use of personal trust relationships to facilitate the fraud. It was one of the factors that pushed the sentence toward the higher end of the guidelines. Victoria thought about Carter at the restaurant in April of the previous year. The practiced ease of him, the way he had slid that velvet box across the table and accepted her father's tears with the expression of a man receiving something he had rightfully earned. She thought about the fake Rolex ticking its 1 step per second lie on her father's wrist. "Thank you, Sarah," she said. She hung up, wrote the date in her legal pad, March 6, 2025, and drew a single horizontal line under it, the way you mark the end of a chapter in a document you are still writing. Then she went back to work. The community processed the aftermath in the way communities process these things. Imperfectly, slowly, with pockets of denial and pockets of clarity distributed unevenly across the social fabric. Deacon Harold Phillips received the first disbursement from the Federal Victims Restitution Fund in February 2025. 62 cents on the dollar, which was better than many Ponzi scheme victims ever saw and still represented a permanent reduction in the security he had spent 40 years building. He had retired from his church board position in January, not by choice, but because the conversations had become too painful and his presence too complicated a reminder of what had happened. Victoria heard this through a mutual acquaintance and felt it as a specific, distinct sadness, the kind that comes from knowing that someone who did nothing wrong is still paying a price. She made a second contribution to the Victims Fund in February, larger than the first, designated specifically for the benefit of retirees and fixed income investors. She did not publicize it. It was not a public gesture. It was just money going where it should go. Aunt Patricia had taken the loss harder than most, not just the financial hit, but the particular betrayal of having been introduced to the scheme by her own brother-in-law, a man she had trusted as family for 35 years. She and Gloria had not spoken since November. Whatever was happening between the two sisters in the aftermath of everything was not Victoria's to navigate, and she consciously kept herself out of it. James Whitfield's bakery, which had been operating in the same Midtown location for 19 years, had come close to closing in the fall. The $95,000 loss had been catastrophic for a small business operating on thin margins. It had survived, barely, through a combination of a community fundraiser organized by customers who had been regulars for decades and a small business loan from a local credit union. Victoria had quietly purchased a catering contract for Simmons Capital Group's office events from Whitfield's Bakery in October, worth about $18,000 annually. She had not mentioned her reasons to anyone. She had given herself until the end of the year. The renovation of 4417 Bel Air Oak Drive began the second week of November, 2 weeks after the eviction was complete, with a full structural inspection and an interior assessment by the contractor she used for all her residential renovation projects. The findings were what she'd expected from a well-maintained house that hadn't been significantly updated since 1997. Solid bones, outdated everything else. She stood in the empty living room on the first day of the renovation and looked at it without the furniture and the family photos and the accumulated weight of 35 years of living, and it was, she realized, just a house. A good house, well built on a generous lot in a desirable neighborhood, with original hardwood floors under the carpet and a kitchen layout that was fundamentally sound beneath the floral wallpaper and the oak cabinet doors. "What's the vision?" her contractor asked, standing beside her with a clipboard. "Clean," Victoria said. "Modern. Light. Take out everything that makes it feel like 1997 and replace it with things that will feel like now in 15 years. He nodded. "Full gut on the kitchen?" "Full gut." "Bathrooms?" "In all of them." "The carpet throughout?" "Sand and refinish the hardwood underneath. If there's no hardwood in the bedrooms, go with wide plank white oak." He was writing. "Timeline?" "I want it market ready by January 15th. He looked up. "That's aggressive." "I know," she said. "That's why I'm using you." The renovation took 11 weeks and cost $162,000. Victoria came by the site twice a week, not to micromanage, but because she found the process, the systematic removal of one thing and its replacement with something better, genuinely satisfying in a way she didn't try to analyze too deeply. She watched the floral wallpaper come down. She watched the oak cabinets get replaced with clean white shaker fronts and brushed brass hardware. She watched the carpet pulled up to reveal the original heart pine floors underneath, darker and richer than she'd expected. the wood grain showing decades of use in the best possible way. She did not feel nostalgic. She had prepared herself for nostalgia, for the particular ambush of memory that she'd been warned about by friends who'd renovated family properties. But it didn't come. What she felt instead, watching the house become something unrecognizable from what it had been, was something closer to relief. The relief of a space being released from what it was used for. The house went on the market on January 20th, 2025, listed at $724,000. It went under contract in 6 days. The buyers were a couple in their early 30s, both software engineers recently transferred to Houston from Seattle, with a 4-year-old son and a second child on the way. They came to the final walkthrough together, the husband carrying the boy on his shoulders, the wife with her hand resting on the curve of her pregnancy. They moved through the rooms quietly, opening closet doors and testing light switches and standing at the kitchen window that looked out over the backyard. At the end of the walkthrough, the husband shook Victoria's hand. "This is exactly what we were looking for," he said. "It feels like a real home. Like people are supposed to be happy here." Victoria looked at him for a moment. "They are," she said. The closing was January 31st, 2025. Net proceeds to Simmons Capital Group after costs and taxes, $531,000. Victoria transferred the funds into the company's acquisition reserve account, the account she drew from when a new property opportunity presented itself. The money from 4417 Bel Air Oak Drive would become something else. It would become a commercial property in Austin, or a warehouse in San Antonio, or an office building somewhere she hadn't identified yet. It would become square footage and lease agreements and employment for her staff and returns for her investors and the ongoing, compounding reality of a business she had built from nothing. It would become the future, which was the only direction she had ever been interested in going. The offices of Simmons Capital Group had been on the 22nd floor of the same downtown tower for 4 years, and Victoria had grown so accustomed to the view that she sometimes forgot it was exceptional. The way you forget, eventually, that the thing you worked hardest for is remarkable, not because it has lost its value, but because it has become simply yours, as natural and unquestioned as breathing. She was reminded of the view on a Tuesday morning in mid-January 2026 when a new associate named Priya, 3 weeks into her first job after business school, stopped mid-sentence during a briefing to look out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the Houston skyline catching the winter light and said, without self-consciousness, "I'm sorry, this view is insane." Victoria looked up from the document she was reviewing and looked at the skyline as if seeing it for the first time in years. The buildings downtown catching the low January sun. The freeways carrying the city's morning business in their familiar choreography. The sky enormous above it, the particular winter blue of a Texas January that had none of the gray heaviness of northern winters, just clear, cold, deeply saturated blue all the way to the horizon. "Yeah," she said, "it really is." Simmons Capital Group had closed 3 major acquisitions in 2025. The Austin deal, a 12-story office building in the downtown core, had closed in March at $21 million, the largest single transaction in the company's history. A mixed-use commercial development in San Antonio had closed in July. A portfolio of industrial warehouse properties outside Houston had closed in October, bringing the company's total holdings to 47 properties across Texas, with a combined assessed value just north of $90 million. Houston Business Journal had named Victoria to their 40 under 40 list in September. She had attended the ceremony, accepted the award, given a brief and gracious speech that mentioned her team 3 times and herself twice, eaten the dinner, and gone home by 9:30. On the way out, a young woman, 23, 24, the ambitious kind of young that reminds you of a version of yourself, had stopped her near the coat check. "Ms. Simmons, I wanted to say I've been following your company for 2 years. I'm trying to get into commercial real estate and how did you start? Like, genuinely, how did you actually start?" Victoria had looked at her for a moment, thought about the honest answer, which was long and complicated and involved a lot of things she didn't typically discuss publicly. "I stopped spending my money on other people's problems," she said, "and I started spending it on my own future. That was the whole thing. That was all of it." The young woman had nodded slowly, the nod of someone filing something away. Victoria had gotten her coat and gone home. She had, over the course of 2025, rebuilt her social life in the way that people rebuild things when they finally have the time and the emotional space to do it properly. Not frantically, not to fill a void, but with the quiet intentionality of someone who has learned through experience what they actually want from other people. There were 6 of them, more or less. The core group, the people she had dinner with on Friday evenings at rotating restaurants and texted on Tuesday mornings about nothing in particular and called when something genuinely good happened, which was now, she had noticed, more often than it used to be. Marcus Webb, no relation to the other Webb, which had been briefly and darkly funny when they'd first been introduced at a real estate conference in Austin, was a commercial attorney who was funny in the dry, understated way that takes a while to recognize and then becomes indispensable. Renata Park was a structural engineer who had done 3 projects for Simmons Capital Group and had transitioned from professional contact to actual friends somewhere around the 2nd project. In the way these transitions sometimes happen so gradually that you can't identify the moment it shifted. There were 3 others, a chef, a journalist, a woman who ran a nonprofit focused on financial literacy in underserved communities, which Victoria had become a board member of in October without making any announcement about it. These people showed up. They showed up for the ordinary things and the significant things and the nothing in particular things, which was, Victoria had come to understand, the whole definition of showing up. They celebrated her successes with a genuineness that had no jealousy in it and no calculation underneath it and no expectation that she would now owe them something. She had not known, until she had this, how much of what she'd previously accepted as normal in relationships had not been normal at all. About her family, Gloria had called in September 2025. Not with a request, not with a crisis, not with the preamble of warmth that preceded a manipulation, just a call. A Sunday afternoon, Victoria was reading on her balcony and her mother's name appeared on the screen. She picked it up. Victoria. Hi, Mom. A silence that was not hostile, just a silence. The kind between 2 people who have a lot of history and not much recent shared ground and are both, perhaps deciding in real time how much ground they want to try to recover. How are you doing, baby? Gloria asked. She sounded older than Victoria remembered. Not frail, just older, in the way that a year of genuine difficulty ages a person differently than ordinary time does. I'm doing well, Mom, Victoria said. Really well, actually. I'm glad, Gloria said. And then, after a pause, I'm glad. They talked for 11 minutes about nothing significant. The weather, a recipe Gloria had been trying, a news story they'd both apparently seen. When Gloria said she should let Victoria go, her voice had the careful, slightly formal quality of someone who is trying very hard not to ask for anything and is finding that discipline genuinely difficult. Take care of yourself, Mom, Victoria said. You too, baby. She had not heard from her mother again before the end of the year. She expected she would eventually. She was not waiting for it, but she was not close to it either. That felt to her like the right position. Not warm, not cold, not performative in either direction. Just honest. Raymond had not contacted her. Not through any number, not through any intermediary, not through Gloria. The prepaid phone message from October 2024, "You are no longer my daughter," had been the last communication, and it had remained the last communication for 15 months. She thought about him sometimes, not with longing, not with anger, but with the particular quality of attention you give to something you are trying to understand clearly and have not entirely finished understanding. She thought about the man he must have been before the fear and the pride had calcified into something impenetrable. She thought about the father he might have been in a different configuration of events, in a parallel life where he had been less afraid of the world and less threatened by a daughter who was not afraid of it at all. She did not grieve him. He was alive. But she had grieved what he had not been, in the quiet, ongoing way you grieve things that were never quite real, and she thought she was mostly through it. Destiny had texted on Christmas Day. "Merry Christmas, sis," 3 words. Victoria had read it, set her phone down, picked it back up and typed, "Merry Christmas, Des," sent it. Put the phone away and went back to the book she was reading. It was not reconciliation. It was not a door opening. It was just 2 people who had once been children in the same house, acknowledging a day on the calendar. It was something. It was also not very much. Both of those things were true at the same time, and Victoria had become, over the past year, significantly more comfortable with the coexistence of true things that didn't resolve neatly into each other. The Austin deal, the 12-story office building, had generated, in its first 9 months of operation, returns that exceeded the pro forma projections by 14%. Her investors were happy. Her team was happy. Her occupancy rate across the portfolio was 91%, which in the current commercial market was exceptional and which she had achieved through a combination of aggressive tenant selection, proactive lease management, and the simple but underrated practice of answering her phone when her tenants called. In January 2026, she had begun preliminary due diligence on a new acquisition, a mixed-use development project in the East Austin corridor still in the planning stages, that if it came together would be the most complex and ambitious project Simmons Capital Group had ever undertaken. The projected deal value was between $35 and $40 million. It would require a capital raise, a new lending relationship, and probably 18 months of development work before the first tenant moved in. She realized, on a Thursday evening in late January, sitting at her desk with the preliminary site reports spread across the glass surface and the Houston skyline going dark outside the windows. She was genuinely, straightforwardly excited about it. Not relieved, not vindicated, not defiant, just excited. The clean, uncomplicated excitement of someone looking at a problem they are well equipped to solve. She had not felt that feeling, purely, without the shadow of something heavier underneath it, since before she could remember. On the last Friday of January 2026, Victoria drove the F250 for the first time in months. She'd kept it in the corporate garage since retrieving it the previous April, used it occasionally for site visits when she needed to transport materials or equipment, but mostly it sat there, a large, immaculate, very specific reminder of the evening that had started all of this. She had thought at various points about selling it, but she hadn't. She wasn't quite ready to explain to herself why. That Friday evening, on impulse, she took it out onto the 610 loop and drove. Just drove. No destination, no purpose, windows cracked to let in the cool January air, the city moving past her in its familiar nighttime configuration. The truck was almost absurdly large for a solo driver on a Houston freeway, but it sat on the road with a solidity she found unexpectedly comforting. The engine was low and constant and entirely indifferent to the fact that it was hauling one person's thoughts through the dark instead of something more practical. She drove for 45 minutes, out through the Galleria corridor, south through Bel Air, not stopping, not slowing, just passing through the neighborhood the way you pass through a part of your own history when you're moving in a direction that doesn't require you to stop, and back up through Midtown and downtown and home. She pulled into the parking garage of her building, killed the engine, and sat for a moment in the quiet. The truck had been the beginning of everything. Her father had used it as proof of something small about her. Carter had tried to use it as the instrument of his own survival. Her family had used it as a stage on which to perform their particular version of love, which was not love, which she now understood was simply a habit of control that had been dressed in love's clothing for so long that everyone involved had confused the costume for the thing itself. The truck was now just a truck. It belonged to her, completely and without complication, the way everything in her life now belonged to her. Not because she had seized it, not because she had taken it from someone else, but because she had built it, bought it, earned it, and refused to give it away to people who had made it very clear they did not know what to do with the things she gave them. She got out of the truck, took the elevator up to the 28th floor, made tea, stood at the window and looked at the city. Houston at midnight in January, the towers lit and the freeways empty and the sky for once clear enough to see a few stars above the glow of the city's ambient light. It was not, objectively, the most beautiful city in the world. It was flat and sprawling and entirely without the topographical drama that made other cities photogenic from a distance. But it was hers. She had built something real inside it from nothing, on her own terms. That was enough. That was, she thought, actually everything. The Austin deal closed on February 19th. It was a Thursday. Victoria was at the title company's office by 8 a.m. in the same charcoal suit she'd worn to the Harris County Courthouse 18 months earlier. She had not done this on purpose. She had simply reached for the suit that felt most like herself. and by 11:30, all the signatures were on all the correct pages, and Simmons Capital Group, LLC, was the owner of a 12-story commercial building in downtown Austin, Texas. Her team had sent a group text at 11:47, a string of champagne emojis from Priya, a single understated thumbs up from her CFO, David, a gif of a confetti cannon from her operations manager, Keisha, that was so enthusiastic it made Victoria laugh out loud in the title company's parking lot. She drove back to Houston that afternoon. She stopped for lunch at a diner outside of Brenham, a small place she had pulled off the highway for on impulse, the kind of old-school Texas roadside institution with laminated menus and sweet tea in mason jars and a pie case on the counter that took the whole enterprise very seriously. She sat at the counter and ate a bowl of chicken and dumplings and a slice of buttermilk pie and read the news on her phone and listened to two older farmers at the far end of the counter have a very detailed conversation about soil moisture content. It was an entirely ordinary hour. Nothing happened. Nobody recognized her. Nobody needed anything from her. The pie was exceptional. She left a $20 tip on a $12 check, got back in the truck, and drove south toward Houston in the late February afternoon, the sky ahead of her going gold and amber over the flat Texas horizon, the road wide and straight and entirely clear. She thought about something Deacon Phillips had said to her at the community conference in November. You asked the right questions at the right time, and about the young woman at the awards dinner, and about Priya looking at the skyline on a Tuesday morning like it was the first time anyone had ever looked at it. She thought about what it meant to build something real in a world that was full of people building things that looked real from a distance but had nothing inside them. She thought briefly and without pain about her father, about the man she had needed him to be and the man he had turned out to be, and the long, necessary work of accepting that those two men were not the same person and never had been. Then she turned the radio on, found a station playing something good, and drove the rest of the way home thinking about the East Austin project and the capital raise and the 18 months of work ahead of her and the 47 properties already in her portfolio and the view from the 22nd floor on a clear day and the Friday evening dinners and Renata's particular kind of dry humor and the buttermilk pie at that diner outside Brenham and whether she could find the place again without GPS. The Houston skyline appeared on the horizon at dusk, familiar and lit and entirely indifferent to her arrival. The way home is always indifferent, which is exactly what makes it home. She drove toward it. To anyone who has ever been the person everyone counted on to stay quiet, your patience is not weakness, your silence is not consent. And the day you decide to use every legitimate tool available to you, legal, financial, strategic, and otherwise, to stop absorbing what was never yours to absorb is not the day you became someone different. It is the day you finally became yourself. The law does not care about family dynamics. Money does not owe loyalty to people who mistake access for entitlement. And the version of you that they depended on staying small is not a version you owe anyone. Build your table, choose who sits at it, and drive home with the radio on.